"You're never going to be a mother, Sarah, never." But there she stood in the town square 5 years later, with 3 beautiful children running around her. The same man who'd spoken those cruel words now stared in shock as little Emma, James, and Lucy called out, "Mama!" with pure joy. Mark's face went white as he watched the impossible. Triplets laughing and playing around the woman he'd abandoned for being broken. How did never become 3 miracles? This is Sarah's story. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee that had been sitting there for over an hour. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the tick-tick-tick of the old clock on the wall. She could still hear Mark's voice echoing in her mind from the night before. "You're never going to be a mother, Sarah. Never!" Those words hit her like a slap across the face. She'd been trying for 3 years now, going to doctors, taking tests, doing everything she could think of, but nothing, not even a spark of hope. Mark had been pacing around their small living room, his face red with frustration. "I can't keep doing this," he'd said, running his hands through his hair. "Every month it's the same disappointment. Every month you look at me like it's my fault." "That's not true," she'd whispered, but her voice was so small it barely made a sound. "Look at your sister Emma," he continued, his voice getting louder. "She's got 3 kids already. Look at our neighbors, honey. Everyone around us is having babies except us. Except you." Sarah felt her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces right there in that moment. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to tell him how much those words hurt, but instead, she just sat there, feeling smaller and smaller with each cruel word. "Maybe we should just accept it," Mark said, his voice softer now, but somehow that made it worse. "Maybe God's trying to tell us something." She went to bed that night with tears soaking her pillow, and Mark slept on the couch. The house felt cold and empty, like all the love had just walked right out the front door. Now, sitting here in the morning light, Sarah realized something had changed forever. Those words weren't just going to disappear. They were going to follow her everywhere she went. Little did she know that cruel sentence was about to become the talk of the whole town. By Tuesday morning, the whole town seemed to know. Sarah walked into Miller's grocery store, and she could feel it right away, that heavy silence that falls when people stop talking the moment you walk in. Mrs. Henderson, who'd known her since she was knee-high to a grasshopper, gave her one of those pitying looks that made Sarah's stomach turn. "Oh, honey," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I heard about your situation. Bless your heart." Sarah grabbed a basket and tried to focus on her shopping list, but the whispers followed her down every aisle like shadows. "Poor thing can't have babies," she heard one woman say. "Mark's been telling folks they've been trying for years now. Nothing's happening. You know what I mean? Such a shame." Another voice chimed in. "She's still young, but sometimes the Lord just doesn't bless some women that way." Sarah's hand started shaking as she reached for a box of cereal. She felt like she was wearing a scarlet letter on her forehead, except instead of adultery, hers spelled out barren. Sunday service was even worse. Pastor Williams meant well when he talked about Hannah praying for a child, but every word felt like a knife twisting in Sarah's chest. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, full of pity and silent questions. After church, Mark's mother cornered her in the parking lot. "Sarah, dear," she said with that fake sweet voice, "maybe you should see another doctor, a specialist. Mark needs children to carry on the family name." The way she said it made Sarah feel like damaged goods, something broken that needed fixing or replacing. Walking home that afternoon, Sarah realized she'd become the town's tragic story, the woman who couldn't do what women were supposedly made to do. But what she didn't know was that Mark's family had already started discussing something that would shatter her world completely. The sound of dresser drawers slamming shut echoed through the house like gunshots. Sarah stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Mark stuff his clothes into that old blue suitcase they'd used for their honeymoon just 4 years ago. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We can work this out. We can try other options. Maybe adoption, or—" "No, Sarah." He didn't even look up from his packing. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live with someone who's never going to give me children." Those words hit her like ice water. She felt her knees go weak and she grabbed onto the doorframe to keep from falling. "But I love you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Doesn't that mean anything? Don't we mean anything?" Mark finally stopped packing and turned to look at her. For just a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of the man she'd married, but then his face hardened again. "Love ain't enough, Sarah. My family needs grandchildren. I need sons to carry on our name. You can't give me that." He zipped up the suitcase with a sound that felt final, like a door slamming shut on her heart. "My mother was right," he said, picking up his bag. "I should have married someone else. Someone who could actually be a real wife." Sarah followed him to the front door, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. As he reached for the doorknob, she fell to her knees right there in the entryway. "Please don't leave me," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything. I'll see more doctors, I'll pray harder, But Mark was already walking away, his footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. He didn't turn around, not even once. Sarah knelt there on the cold floor until the sun went down, feeling like her whole world had just walked out that door. In that moment, she truly believed her life was over. But sometimes, when everything falls apart, that's exactly when God starts building something new. Sarah's childhood bedroom felt smaller than she remembered. The faded pink wallpaper with tiny roses seemed to mock her now. A grown woman of 26, back home with her mama like a little girl who couldn't make it in the real world. Her mother, Betty, had welcomed her with open arms and a pot of chicken soup, but even Mama's love couldn't fill the hole in Sarah's heart. Every night she lay in that narrow twin bed, staring at the ceiling and hearing Mark's cruel words over and over again. "You're never going to be a mother, Sarah. Never." The words played in her mind like a broken record, keeping her awake until the early morning hours. She'd gotten so used to crying that her pillow stayed damp most nights. During the day, she helped Mama around the house, trying to keep busy. But every time she passed a mother pushing a stroller or heard a baby crying at the grocery store, the pain came rushing back like a flood. "Honey, you gotta stop blaming yourself," Betty would say, finding Sarah crying at the kitchen table again. "That boy was cruel to you, real cruel. You're better off without someone who could say such hurtful things." But Sarah didn't feel better off. She felt broken, discarded, like something nobody wanted. 3 weeks into living back home, Sarah found herself on her knees beside that little twin bed at 2 in the morning, praying harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. "Lord," she whispered through her tears, "I don't understand why this is happening to me. I feel so lost, so alone. Please show me what you want me to do." Night after night, she poured her heart out to God, transforming all that pain into prayer. Slowly, something began to shift inside her. Not the pain going away, but something deeper growing stronger. What Sarah didn't know was that this valley of tears was about to become the fertile ground where the impossible would finally take root. After 2 months of drowning in her own tears, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She couldn't keep living like a ghost in her mama's house. If Mark thought she was worthless, well, she was going to prove him wrong. "Mama, I'm going to get a job," she announced one morning over breakfast. "I can't just sit here feeling sorry for myself forever." Betty smiled for the first time in weeks. "That's my girl. What you thinking about doing?" Sarah found work at the town's only daycare center. Mrs. Patterson, the owner, had known Sarah since she was little and needed help with the growing number of children. "I gotta warn you, honey," Mrs. Patterson said during the interview, "working with babies might be hard on you considering, well, you know." Sarah's heart clenched, but she lifted her chin. "I'll be fine. I need this." The first day was torture. Surrounded by little ones calling for their mommies, changing diapers, feeding bottles, every moment reminded her of what she couldn't have. But something strange started happening. She discovered she had a gift. Crying babies seemed to calm down in her arms. Fussy toddlers would settle when she sang to them. The other teachers started asking for her help with the difficult children. "You're a natural," Mrs. Patterson told her after a month. "These kids just love you." At home, Sarah started cooking elaborate meals for her and Mama, experimenting with recipes she'd never tried before. The kitchen became her sanctuary, a place where she could create something beautiful even when she felt broken inside. "Lord knows you got your grandmother's touch in the kitchen," Betty would say, savoring Sarah's homemade bread. For the first time since Mark left, Sarah felt useful. Not whole, that wound was still raw, but like maybe she had purpose beyond being somebody's wife. One afternoon, while she was helping little Emma Rodriguez tie her shoes, she looked up and caught someone watching her through the daycare window. A man she'd never seen before, with kind eyes that seemed to see right through to her soul. Their eyes met for just a moment, and something shifted in Sarah's chest, something she thought had died forever. His name was David, and he worked as a carpenter in town. Sarah learned this when he showed up at the daycare the next week to fix a broken swing set. Mrs. Patterson introduced them properly this time. "Sarah, this is David Mitchell. David, meet Sarah. She's our miracle worker with the little ones." David smiled, and Sarah noticed how his whole face lit up when he did. "Pleasure to meet you officially," he said, tipping his worn baseball cap. While he worked, Sarah found herself stealing glances at him. There was something gentle about the way he handled his tools, patient and careful. When little Tommy Williams started crying because his mum was late, David stopped working and carved a tiny wooden horse right there on the spot. "Here you go, buddy," he said, handing it to the boy. "Something to keep you company." Over the following weeks, David started finding reasons to come by the daycare. A squeaky door here, a loose board there. Sarah began to realize he was making excuses just to see her. One afternoon, as they watched the children play, David said something that nearly knocked Sarah off her feet. "You know, you're not less of a woman because you don't have children of your own." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She'd never told him about Mark, about her struggles, but somehow he seemed to understand. "I see how those kids love you," he continued, his voice soft and sure. "I see how you love them back. That's what makes someone special. Not whether they can have babies, but how much love they got in their heart." Tears started flowing down Sarah's cheeks before she could stop them. For so long she'd felt like damaged goods, like she wasn't a real woman because her body wouldn't cooperate. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah," David said, gently wiping away her tears with his calloused thumb. "Stronger than anyone who's ever hurt you." For the first time since Mark left, Sarah felt seen, really seen for who she was, not for what she couldn't do. What she didn't know was that David's kindness was about to become the foundation for a miracle that would change everything. 2 years had passed since David came into Sarah's life. They'd married in a simple ceremony at the little church on Maple Street, with just family and close friends. Sarah had finally found peace, even though the dream of children seemed like something she'd buried along with her old life. She was 29 now, working full-time at the daycare and helping David with his carpentry business. Life was good, not the life she'd once imagined, but a good life all the same. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah woke up feeling queasy, thinking she'd caught the stomach bug that was going around the daycare. But when the nausea persisted for a week, David insisted she see Dr. Thompson. "Probably just stress," she told David on the way to the clinic. "You know how busy we've been with the business." Dr. Thompson, who'd known Sarah since she was a little girl, ran some tests and told her to come back in a few days. Sarah didn't think much of it. After all those years of disappointment, pregnancy wasn't even on her radar anymore. When they called her back to the office, Dr. Thompson had the strangest smile on his face. "Sarah, honey," he said, "I've got some news that's going to knock your socks clean off." Sarah gripped David's hand, expecting bad news. She'd learned not to hope for good surprises. "You're pregnant," Dr. Thompson announced, his smile growing wider. Sarah's world stopped spinning. That's impossible," she whispered. "Oh, but it gets better," the doctor continued, pulling up the ultrasound image. "Sarah, you're not just having one baby, you're having 3. Sarah stared at the screen, seeing 3 tiny heartbeats flickering like little stars. The tears came fast and hard. Years of pain, years of Mark's cruel words, years of thinking she was broken. "Triplets," she sobbed into David's shoulder. "After all this time, 3 babies." Mark's voice echoed in her memory. "You're never going to be a mother, Sarah. Never." Well, she was about to become a mother 3 times over. But as the joy settled in, a new worry crept into Sarah's heart. How would the town react when they found out the woman they'd pitied for being barren was now carrying 3 miracles? 9 months later, Sarah walked down Main Street with her triple stroller, feeling like she was in a dream. Baby Emma gurgled happily on the left, little James slept peacefully in the middle, and sweet Lucy waved her tiny fists at the world. The town that had once whispered about her inability to have children now fell silent as she passed. It wasn't the cruel silence of gossip anymore. It was the hushed awe of witnessing something impossible. At Miller's grocery store, the same women who'd pitied her years ago now stared in amazement. Mrs. Henderson, who'd once given her those condescending looks, approached with tears in her eyes. "Sarah, honey," she whispered, "those babies are absolutely beautiful, 3 at once. It's like a miracle walking among us." Sarah smiled graciously, remembering how those same lips had once spread hurtful gossip about her. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. God's been very good to us." As she wheeled the stroller through the produce section, conversation stopped mid-sentence. People turned to stare, not with pity this time, but with wonder. Some crossed themselves, others just shook their heads in disbelief. "That's the woman who couldn't have babies," she heard someone whisper to their friend. "Now look at her, 3 healthy children at once." Sunday service was something else entirely. Pastor Williams asked Sarah and David to bring the babies forward for a blessing. and the whole congregation erupted in praise. These were the same people who'd once looked at her with pity, now celebrating her as living proof that God still performs miracles. Walking home from church, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete vindication. Every cruel word, every pitying glance, every whispered comment had been answered by these 3 precious lives. She was no longer the broken woman who couldn't fulfill her purpose. She was the mother who defied every doubt, every cruel prediction, every limiting word ever spoken over her life. But there was still one person in town who hadn't seen her transformation, the man whose words had started this whole painful journey. Mark was back in town, and their paths were about to cross. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon in the town square. Sarah was watching her 3-year-old triplets play on the playground, while David pushed them on the swings. Emma was giggling as she went higher. James was carefully climbing the monkey bars, and Lucy was sliding down the big slide with pure joy. Sarah sat on the bench, her heart full, as she watched these 3 miracles that everyone said would never exist. The children were healthy, happy, and absolutely beautiful. Emma with her mama's dark hair, James with his daddy David's gentle eyes, and Lucy with the brightest smile in the whole world. Then she saw him. Mark stood at the edge of the playground, frozen like a statue. His mouth was hanging open, his eyes wide with shock as he stared at the 3 children running around Sarah like she was the center of their universe. "Mama! Mama!" little Emma called out, running straight into Sarah's arms. "Did you see how high I went on the swing?" Sarah scooped her daughter up, kissing her cheek. "I saw, baby girl. You're getting so brave." Mark took a few shaky steps forward, his face pale as a ghost. Sarah looked up and met his eyes for the first time in over 5 years. She saw recognition dawn on his face, followed by something that looked like disbelief. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible. James and Lucy came running over too, wrapping their little arms around Sarah's legs. "Mama, can we go get ice cream after this?" James asked in his sweet little voice. Mark's eyes filled with tears as he watched the scene unfold. His hands started shaking, and he opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Sarah stood up slowly, her children clustering around her like little chicks around their mother hen. She looked at Mark with dignity, not anger, not bitterness, just quiet strength. In that moment, the cruel words he'd spoken all those years ago echoed in both their minds. "You're never going to be a mother, Sarah. Never." But now, standing there surrounded by 3 beautiful children, those words had taken on a completely different meaning. Mark finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Sarah, I don't understand. How is this possible?" Sarah looked at him with calm eyes, her children still gathered around her like a protective shield of love. "This is Emma, James, and Lucy," she said simply. "My children." "But the doctors said," Mark stammered, his face crumpling. "They told you that you couldn't." "The doctors were wrong," Sarah replied, her voice steady and sure, "just like you were wrong." David appeared beside them, having finished helping another child on the swings. He put his arm protectively around Sarah's shoulders, and the children immediately recognized their daddy's presence. "Daddy, Daddy," Lucy called out, reaching up for him. David scooped her up with a smile that showed pure, unconditional love. Mark stared at the family before him, the family that should have been his, the children he'd thrown away because he believed cruel words instead of holding on to hope. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I was wrong about everything. I was cruel and heartless, and You were," Sarah interrupted gently but firmly. "But that was a long time ago, Mark. I've forgiven you, not for your sake, but for mine." The whole town square had gone quiet. People pretended to be busy with their own activities, but everyone was watching this moment unfold. The woman who'd been publicly humiliated, now standing victorious with 3 beautiful children. "You're never going to be a mother, Sarah. Never." Those words that had once cut so deep now seemed like empty noise, powerless against the reality standing before them. Mark walked away that day a broken man, finally understanding that he'd thrown away something precious. But Sarah walked home with her head held high, surrounded by the 3 miracles that proved one eternal truth. When God decides to bless you, no human voice can stop it. Sometimes the most impossible dreams come true in the most unexpected ways.